Hey, I'm Adam Foss, and I'm going to do a gear seminar today. Thank you for checking this out. Thank you for registering for the virtual Sheep Week. We can't be together. I was wishing pretty badly that I was in Reno with all of you right now, but we're going to go through my gear that I bring on a backpack hunting trip into the mountains. So I'm up in British Columbia, Canada. I grew up in Alberta hunting bighorn sheep over there with a bow, and now I live in BC, and I've hunted sheep throughout North America and have had some awesome adventures. Fortunately, I get to do it most of the season. I get to bring a camera and photograph and film some of these adventures and some of these trips. And so I'm gonna run through all the stuff that I bring on those trips. But first, I wanna talk about some of the concepts that I think about when packing my gear, which I think is equally as important as just a gear list. If you think about why you bring things, you'll be able to make informed decisions as to what gear you should bring for what backpack hunt, because every sheep hunt is still a little bit different than another sheep hunt. So I'm gonna go through those. Also worth mentioning, we're gonna be giving something away from this system. So if you stick around till the end, there's gonna be a live Q&A afterwards, and I'm gonna give away a piece of gear. So let's get into these concepts right now. So the first concept is your equipment should serve multiple purposes. That is so critical. If it doesn't serve 2 or even 3 purposes, it's almost not worth bringing unless it's a very specific piece of equipment like your weapon or your optics. Those are obviously only used for just that single purpose. But for things like trekking poles, dry bags, your phone that you might bring in, you can use your dry bag for meat storage. You can use it for food storage. You can use it to bail water if you need to carry water up the mountain. Your trekking pole, you're using it for hiking, obviously for its main purpose, but you can use it to pitch up a tarp. You can use it to scrape out a spot to pitch your tent. And a tarp can be used for protection from the wind and the rain, but it can also be used for meat care. So you can spread a tarp out, put your meat on top of it, keep it clean. It has a lot of uses. So pretty much everything that I bring will have a couple of uses unless it's only specifically meant for the thing that it's meant for. So that's the first concept. Let's get into the second one. Okay, so the second concept is all about comfort versus ultralight versus safety. You have to kind of get into the mindset that the buzzword of ultralight hunting has been really sort of enforced by a lot of people in the last 5 or 10 years. And the innovation of gear has been really exciting to see. However, a lot of people that are talking about ultralight hunting either A, have tons of experience with what they're doing, and they've tested this stuff out and they've gone through the different ways that you can hunt and the sacrifices that they are willing to make based on their own experiences, or B, they might just be kind of jumping onto the bandwagon. And for sheep hunting, I'm talking specifically for mountain hunts, you don't really have the opportunity to just bring the absolute bare minimum, lightest weight shelter, lightest weight everything, because it could cost you your hunt. It could cost you an uncomfortable experience. And so for me personally, this is based on a number of years trying this stuff out. I've found kind of like a happy medium of sort of comfort and thinking about the purpose of being out there too is to hopefully have a little bit of fun. You're not going to be fun if you're holding down a tarp or you're sleeping in a bivy sack and it's rained for 10 days in a row. It just isn't enjoyable. And again, it can kind of infringe on your safety. So for sheep hunting, it might work for early season elk hunting or fair weather mule deer hunting if you're out for a few days. But for sheep hunting generally, it's so remote, it's so many days to go back to civilization, to go back to base camp, and you've spent so much time and money to get there. I think that's just an underlying theme to think about when you are selecting gear, is the balance between ultralightness, comfort, and safety. The third concept is equally as important when you're thinking about what to pack, is what not to pack. And so this has come for me after bringing things that I just didn't use, that weren't necessary. So I want to talk to you guys about that before we go into our gear list, because there's things that you just should never pack. Probably the first thing that I brought too much of initially when I was backpack hunting 10 or 12 or 15 years ago was extra clothes. Extra clothes like extra pair of pants. You just don't ever end up needing an extra pair of pants. Yes, you need rain pants and a pair of hiking pants, but you don't need 2 or 3 pairs of pants. I always thought if something got wet, I would put on a fresh dry pair. It just doesn't happen. Many, many, many pairs of socks. I bring 2 or maybe 3 pairs of socks, but I used to bring 4 or 5, many pairs of underwear. Kind of gross, but honestly, one extra one. Just don't bring a lot of that extra stuff, because I find it just sits in your pack as a just in case and you don't use it. Things like rope, this is just parachute cord. That's the maximum thing that I would bring. Just a small thing of parachute cord. I honestly probably wouldn't even bring more than that. This is 50 feet, that's a ton. I used to bring big gobs of rope and it just sat at the bottom of my pack and just didn't use it. So if it's a just in case item, I would think about ditching it. Think about if you're actually using it, and then maybe you can scale it down to something really, really small, or better yet, leave it at home if it's not an emergency item or a just in case item that you think you may use, but you don't actually use it. Okay, so the fourth concept is making it personal to you. All this stuff that I'm going to talk about is my own personal thoughts and feelings based on the experiences that I've had with this equipment, with the conditions that I've encountered, and also my personal style and how I like to hunt. I touched on it earlier, but I like to be a little bit more comfortable. I like to have a little bit more safety assurances that I can be out there longer. I can sit through bad weather. I can sit through tough hunting conditions and be out there for longer. When you're bow hunting and when you're sheep hunting, you're on these challenging hunts, you kind of need to be out there as long as you can, and you don't want to go home because you have a piece of gear let you down or you wish you had something that you didn't bring. So make it personal to yourself and test this stuff out. I mean, take it out on backpacking trips and fishing trips and overnight trips and scouting trips. Try this stuff out for yourself and you'll find what boots work, what pack works, what optics work, not just kind of consuming a gear list that I throw you or anyone throws you, because you should take everything that I say that's coming up with a grain of salt. Also, the companies that make this equipment, I believe in, I've tried them out. You should try them out too. There's a lot of great gear companies out there. They make fantastic technical apparel and boots and backpacks and bows and all these pieces of gear now, more than ever before. They're getting better and better and better. So there's a lot of great companies. This is just the stuff that I use. I personally believe in it. The companies that make this stuff, they believe in things that I believe in, like conservation, like hunting in wild places. And the reason that we're right here on the Sheep Week virtual grand sheep show tour is, I'm getting very excited about the conservation side of things, is because all these companies support what we love to do. And so that's why I choose to use a lot of this gear that I'm talking about today. But try it out for yourself first before you just dive in. I think that most of this stuff is going to treat you very, very well, as it has treated me. Okay, so this is the last concept. This is called packing smart. And what I mean by that is what you bring is almost as important as how you arrange it in your pack. I've hunted with many different people and watched how people move through the mountains and think about the activity that is sheep hunting, making camp, getting water, climbing the mountain, sitting down, glassing, experiencing a rainstorm, throwing on your rain gear, taking it off, sweating, all those sorts of things. You want to keep those items that you want quick access to quickly accessible. So waist belt pockets should have things like your snacks. I've got some sunscreen in here, your SOS safety device, which is an InReach, and quick burning, high sugar foods like Shot Blocks. The back pockets and easily accessible pockets should have your rain gear in it. I know that seems obvious, but I can't tell you how many people get on top of the mountain and their rain gear's in the very bottom of their pack. So, and then even how you pack your rain gear, you can fold it up into its hood and really save a lot of volume just on clothing items by how you pack it. So that's just the basics, and I'm going to get into this stuff more as we go through the different parts of my gear list, but packing smart and thinking about how your gear is organized is almost as important as what you're actually bringing. Okay, so now we're going to break down all the gear that I would bring on a mountain hunt. First up is the sleep system. So how I think about the proper sleep system for a proper hunt is based off of the season that I'm in, the temperatures that I might expect to encounter, and how exposed some of the pitching locations might be. But generally on a sheep hunt, you just want to be prepared for the worst possible case. You might be camped up on top, exposed to the wind and rain and snow. So bringing the most durable bomber tent that you can bring is what I would recommend. I use a tent from Hilleberg, a few different ones. This is an Enan. This is a really, really, really light one-man tent that I'll use on early season hunts. I'll also use a Niak, which is a 1.5 man tent, and have loved that one in the last couple years. I'll go to something a little bit bigger, like a Nalo 2, depending on if we're getting later in the season or I'm with a hunting partner. I might go with the Nalo 3 GT or something like that. Another really great tent is the Anjan series, so the Anjan tube style tents, which they come in a 2 and a 3 GT, which is an extended vestibule. Those are great if I'm going with a bigger person. I have tons of gear like camera gear, and we both have bows or something like that. I might want that extra vestibule. But no matter what kind of tent you get, what brand you get, you just want to make sure that you try this stuff out. Make sure you can pitch it in the dark with your eyes closed, with your hands frozen. That's what I would recommend. I think that's the learning curve on tents is if you're not used to using them and you're not trying them out, you're not going to get the most out of them and the most protection from the elements and the most ventilation. And that's where I think some of the errors come in is people buy a brand new tent, they just run out into the woods and they kind of have some problems or it's just not performing as well as they can. So that's how I think about tents. Then I've got my pad, my sleeping pad. This is a Thermarest X-Therm Neo Air, and have done quite a bit of research. Most of the people in sort of the backpacking ultralight mid to late season camping realm are using an X-Therm. It's got the highest R value to weight ratio. I think it's like a 5.6 and it's 16 ounces. So it's a heavier pad than some of the lighter weight pads, but it's got such a punch for the weight in terms of warmth. And I think a lot of people overlook the value of a sleeping pad when contributing to the warmth of their overall sleep system. So this one from Thermarest is really, really good. And I bring that all year long because I think it does give the atom element of warmth that I'm looking for. I have a kind of a quiver of sleeping bags. This one is from Mountain Equipment. I've been trying out one from Sitka this year as well. And those are a little bit more personal depending on your body temperature and how you sleep. I sleep probably medium, not super hot, not super cold, but I find the temperature rating to be about accurate. The main thing I wanted to hit on was the importance of a pad in the way that it commits and contributes to your warmth in your sleeping bag. The other thing that I always bring is a little inflatable pillow. Which it might weigh a few more ounces, but again, I hit on it earlier. I sleep so good out there just with a little inflatable pillow. It doesn't weigh much. And the last thing in my sleep and shelter system is a tiny little tarp from Hilleberg. And the thing that I would say about a tarp is it does have many uses. This is just their little Ultralight 5 that really gets down really, really small. The critical thing about tarps, I think I have seen this and have done this. You have a tarp, but I've never been in a situation where you need a tarp and you have a lot of time until you need that tarp deployed. You need these things deployed fast. And so the nice thing is you kind of have to keep them a little bit ready to go. So these are just in a big, loose, loopy knot. And the nice thing about the Hilleberg ones is they come with the runner and a tensioner. So you can tension this thing down and it gives you tons of super bomber metal D-rings. And you just have this thing pitched with your trekking poles or the trees or the rocks that you're using. And it's a really critical piece of gear. I mean, if you want to think about safety and comfort, that adds to it, but also adds to the actual like strategic hunting advantage because you can set this tarp up, you can set it off the edge of your tent, and you can glass longer. You can sort of glass rain and fog pockets, and it'll keep you out there hunting longer and keep you a little bit safer. So I always have a tarp on all those hunts. Okay, so the next gear breakdown item is boots and footwear. This is, bar none, the most personal item, probably along with your pack, than anything else that you have. Your boots obviously have to fit on your feet and they have to be comfortable. I think the biggest mistake people make when we're talking about boots is they don't break them in. They don't have a lot of experience in knowing what type of foot needs to go in what type of boot. And their own foot is a very personally sized and fit piece of equipment. So there's a debate about two different styles of boots, and I've tried both of them. I've gone back and forth to both of them, but basically it's a leather style boot, more of a traditional style boot, something like a Schnee's leather boot, compared to a more synthetic, more mountaineering style boot, like a La Sportiva Trango or something a little bit more for the later season. Main differences there is leather boots are going to be an easier break-in period, and they're probably going to be just a little bit more comfortable. They're also going to be more durable. These have been through the ringer, but they will last just a little bit longer on that really, really sharp shale. I think one of the things that happens in a synthetic boot is all the different sharp pieces of rock do cut into the material, whether it's a Cordura or some synthetic material. It just doesn't seem to retain as much durability as a leather boot. The overall performance of a synthetic boot and a mountaineering style boot, in my opinion, is a little bit higher. They're a lighter weight boot. They're gonna offer a little bit more stiffness under the foot. They don't seem to soak up as much water. Like if your leather boot gets wet, it's gonna be wet the whole hunt. It doesn't seem to dry out, whereas a synthetic boot probably won't soak that moisture up. And if it does, it actually has a chance to dry from my experience anyways. The other thing I want to talk about is the seasonality of boots. And so I'll take something like a Trango from La Sportiva in the earlier to mid-season. This is their Tower Extreme. It's a little bit stiffer, probably stiffer for most people than, especially if you're coming from a leather boot, but awesome for something where you might expect a little bit of snow or a goat hunt or something like that. There's just so much stiffness and you get so much purchase out of digging your toes in. And maybe if you're doing more miles and your feet aren't as used to something in a synthetic, you might want something from Schnee's or something from Crispy. These are Crispies. I had them last year. They were pretty nice, and they're actually a pretty stiff leather boot. So I would recommend checking those out, but I'd also recommend trying them on and getting to know your foot. Something in the later season is a pretty rad boot from La Sportiva. It's got an internal, what do they used to call this thing? I don't even remember what they call it anymore. It's got a big cuff strap, and it's got a double sort of boot and a half gaiter. So really light for how warm it is, and it'll get you a little bit later into the season. On the topic of gaiters, no matter what boot you end up with, waterproof gaiters, totally critical. Something that I'll always have on a hunt. Wear them probably 90% of the time or more. If you go later into the season, let's talk a little bit about the options that you have and that we would bring on some stuff later in October and in November, hunting something like bighorn sheep. Micro spikes, which just go right on the bottom of your boot. They're very light and compact. They're just gonna give you a little bit more grip when there's a bit of snow on the ground. They're not gonna be something like a full-on mountaineering crampon that you might bring if you're expecting a ton of snow and hard snow, and really when it kind of rains and snows and freezes into like a very thick ice layer, where you're hunting something like late season goats, might want to look into full-on crampons for a mountaineering boot. But honestly, I think that the micro spikes are a pretty good option most of the time. And the other key component of micro spikes is they're so easy to put on and off, and you can put them on with gloves and take them off. If you're on the fence about whether or not to throw them on, you just pull over, you throw them on, and you keep going. Whereas crampons just seem to be a little bit more of an investment to sit down, take your gloves off, take them out, get them tightened. And sometimes you don't put them on because of that, and then they're not doing anything within your pack. They're also a lot heavier and a lot bulkier than just a really light pair of spikes. So recommend for a mid to late season hunt, the chance of snow, the chance of ice, spikes are a pretty good investment and not a huge weight consequence. The other thing to do with boots is sort of your stability and your trekking poles. And since we're talking about the mid to late season, an ice axe, or this is a Black Diamond Whippet. And I love this thing because it has a detachable ice axe blade on it. So you can self-arrest yourself if you're falling down the mountain. You can also use it for scratching and scraping out little camp spots or glassing pads. I don't have the attachment on there right now, but you can see that you can screw it in right there. And they do make one that it lives on there so you don't lose it like I did, but it's somewhere in this gear mess. I always have a couple of different strands of Gorilla Tape around the trekking pole, so it's quick access. I like probably the ability to collapse these into 3 different lengths, because if you don't need them, they can go on your pack. If you get the 2-layer trekking poles, they don't quite break down small enough to fit on your pack. So a 3-pole section is a little bit better in my opinion. And also this really positive lock clasp that I've used the threading styles or the screwing style poles, and they really seem to fail and fall apart. So would really recommend something with a clasp. This is Black Diamond. They make pretty great accessories when it comes to this stuff. But that's how I think about footwear. That's a ton of information. Hopefully helps at least start thinking about what footwear you should bring on your sheep hunt. Okay, so the next group of equipment that I bring is a clothing system. This is critical as a part of gear that goes on a sheep hunt. I'll start from the inside out and talk about base layers first. I'm a pretty big fan of synthetic base layers. I just think that they dry super fast. They've gotten quite a bit better in terms of the stink that you get, in terms of comparing it to something like merino. I like merino wool. I've always used merino wool, but I kind of converted back to synthetic probably in the last 4 or 5 years when synthetic layers started to get a little bit less stinky with some of the technology that you can put into them. And they dry super, super fast. So maybe a merino wool would be an option if you really smell really bad or you really like that kind of natural temperature regulation that you get. It keeps you a little bit cooler when you're hot and a little bit warmer when you're cold than synthetic. That's what merino does, but I'm a big fan of synthetic. So synthetic base layers and just a light pair of hiking pants, super light. I just don't like to be hot when I'm hiking. Can always add something like your insulation layers when you stop and sit down in glass or camp. So something like these light packable down pants are super, super nice. And same thing, down jacket with a hood, something that is just critical. I mean, it compacts down to something like a really small softball, and you just have to have this stuff. I don't bring a lot of clothes, but I just like to bring the right clothes. And so other things that I'm looking at is merino underwear. I do wear merino for underwear. I think that's one area that it can smell a little bit more than synthetic. So merino is the way to go. Same with socks. I'll bring 2 pairs of socks, maybe 3, but usually just 2. Little accessories like 1 pair of gloves and a ball cap. And then on my most outer shell, I've got just really light packable rain gear that has no more features. I don't want tons of bells and whistles and pockets and extra stuff. Just very simple, a couple of pockets, and it to get down to as small as it can possibly get down to and weigh as little as possible. But the key thing is it has to be durable. Sheep hunting is a contact sport. You're bushwhacking, you're crawling through rocks, and you have to have a set of rain gear that's going to last through that stuff. Something really light. I've seen people's rain gear get shredded on different hunts, goat hunts, sheep hunts, and it's not pretty. It's held together by duct tape, and the hunt usually does not end as dry as it started. I think that's pretty much it in my clothing system. If you have specific questions about what piece is what, you can ask in the Q&A. And really, I think the important thing about clothing is that it works together as a system. You think about layers, you add them on. The other thing is you don't really need tons of extra layers, because if you get one wet, you can dry it in your sleeping bag. So you wear your wet layers to bed, you stuff them in the bottom of your sleeping bag if it's totally wet, and your body heat will actually cook the clothing dry. That's why I really like synthetic base layers, because they dry quite a bit faster. Using something like your insulation, your sleeping bag, your puffy coat, it'll help dry all your clothing out, and it'll save you from just bringing tons and tons of extra clothes and extra socks and extra underwear. So it'll simplify your life, and it'll also cut down your pack weight. Okay, so the next group of equipment is optics, and it cannot be understated how important good glass is on a sheep hunt or any mountain hunt for that matter. And so I'm gonna run through what I would normally bring. I've got a set of 10s on my chest, super accessible at all times. Like the ability to have them handy and completely covered. Also, what has come onto the scene is a more customizable solution for having an optics harness and having items accessible. Like you can have your rangefinder, you can have a lighter or something that you need quick access to that's right there on your chest, and you can alter these different pocket configurations. Maybe you're just hunting for the day or something like that, you can knock that off. You can also have things like your bear spray right on your chest if you're going through thick willows. That's super nice to have, because I always have my bear spray on my pack, but then I take my pack off and my bear spray is back in my pack. Next thing is a spotting scope, super critical for aging sheep and trying to figure out if they're going to be legal or worth making the big long hike. Sometimes you might be carrying an extra 6 ounces or an extra 8 ounces in spotting scope, but you might save yourself miles and miles of hiking by identifying if a ram is not old enough or big enough, and you wouldn't have gone after them in the first place. So good spotting scope. Of course, good tripod. Big fan of a carbon tripod. Don't need to go overboard with tripods in my opinion, but just something light and from one of the more premium brands is going to last you in the mountains and not break down. Carbon is sort of the only way to go. Aluminum is not really what you want to take anymore. And the other thing that we've started to do a little bit, learning from desert sheep hunters and coos deer hunters down in the desert, they will run a pair of 15s. And so we've started to take 15s into the mountains. And what we would do is if I'm hunting with a sheep hunting partner, they might have 10s and I might have 15s. And we can share the duties of glassing 2 different distances. 15s on a tripod, like using this system right here to mount them, is super handy. A good fluid head is critical when you're using a tripod for glassing with 15s. That's all you really need. And I think I would just encourage people to get the best glasses they possibly can and think about what hunts they're going on, how long the looks are. If you need 15s or you can get away with 10s, if you're going with something with higher magnification, mount it on a tripod. It's a must. You'll actually find more game because you're not shaking quite as much, even if you're going to use 10s. 10s can go on a tripod too. Good spotting scope, and keeping your optics handy on your chest away from the dirt and the rain and the snow is important too. Okay, so food is one of the most important things to think about because it is really personal to the individual. I've made lots of mistakes when it comes to food. I've brought in too much food, I've brought not enough food, and I've kind of landed at a nice middle ground for the amount of food that I might bring on a hunt. A couple key things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for about 160 calories per ounce of if this food item is gonna make it in my pack. It's not true all the time, but when I'm thinking about a bar, it's gotta be super calorie dense. So this is just a bit of a spread of some of the gear, or sorry, some of the food that I would bring. I would bring oatmeal for breakfast, instant coffee, a protein shake. I've kind of been a fan of working these in, a little bit of protein, because I just don't think you get enough protein. Your muscles are working so hard out there. It's nice to have a little bit more. Protein bar, other bars, quick burning, something like a shot block or a gel is gonna give you energy when you need it. And a little bit of caffeine is nice too. And the thing that I want to talk about is fats. I mean, peanut butter is super dense in calories. It tastes great. You can eat it in anything. The other thing that we've done over the years is bring things like olive oil packets, or these are coconut oil packets. So you can drop those in your coffee. You can drop those in your freeze-dried dinner if that's what you're doing at night. They taste great and they have tons of calories. So you might be getting 220 or 240 calories an ounce with something like coconut oil or olive oil. So I'd really recommend looking at that if you're trying to get your calories up and keep your weight of your food down. I usually probably eat 2,500 or 2,800 calories a day. I'm on the higher end. I like to not be hungry, but it's quality over quantity. It's not necessarily lots of food that just doesn't have the density of calories that you're looking for. And so that's what I would recommend looking into. My cooking system is a stove. I have a couple of little collapsible cups that don't really weigh a whole lot, but they pop out. So I have one for coffee, one for something like ramen, if I'm gonna throw a ramen in. I've got my titanium spoon. And last but not least is fuel. Usually the calculation is 5 days for 2 people, just for moderate boiling for a double can. So this is a double can. I think these are 8 ounces of fuel. 8.1 ounces of fuel. So 2 of these on a 10-day hunt for 2 people is about the calculation. Now this varies an incredible amount. If you're getting colder temperatures or you're melting snow in the late season, you need to bring probably 50% more fuel. So you need 3 of these. I will bring 2 of these on a 10-day hunt, and you can do the math from there. If it's 1 person for 10 days, you'll be able to get away with 8 ounces of fuel if it's just moderate boiling. So coffee in the morning, freeze-dried dinner at night, and not a ton of boiling during the day, just with moderate temperatures. That's sort of my rule of thumb. And that's a look at all the food and cooking system items that I'll bring on a sheep hunt. Okay, so the next group of items that I like to bring on a hunt is my weapon, my bow that I'm bringing on a sheep hunt. And so one thing that's important to mention is I like to have the ability to take off things like stabilizers or slide my sight in if it's going to be a long pack in. There's quick attaches that you can get to pop off your sidebars and your stabilizers. I'm not going to do all of them right now, but if you do that, I find when you're bushwhacking on the way in, it's super nice. It's a tighter profile on your back, so you don't have to drag stuff, and then you can quickly mount them back on. And don't forget to slide your sight back out. But to that point, that's why I always bring a target. This is just a little backpacking target. You can attach it to the bottom of your pack. It does weigh a few ounces, but it doubles as a sitting pad, or you can cut meat up on it, and it's pretty handy. You can check and make sure your bow's on. I would almost try to shoot 1 arrow maybe every day or every other day, just to make sure. There's so many bumps and bangs and rocks and things that might knock your sight off or knock your bow out of whack. So if you can shoot an arrow every day, it kind of helps build your confidence that your equipment hasn't been damaged on the rigors of a mountain hunt. And that'll help you to remember to slide your sight back out when you get to where you're going. I always bring a string cover, so that goes over top of the string to protect the string from sharp rocks. It also has an attachable sight cover and a fletch cover for your arrows that goes on top of your quiver. Really handy piece of gear for sheep hunts. And I've got my quiver with my arrows. I'll also pack in extra arrows in an arrow tube. So this is just going to protect it. The tube itself doesn't weigh a whole lot. I might bring anywhere from 10 to 12 arrows. It's pretty handy to have extra ones if you are taking practice shots. If you fall and break your arrows in your quiver, you're going to have a fresh load. It should never be a thought of if I have enough arrows. And that's pretty much all my archery equipment, and that's how I pack it, how I think about traveling with it and taking care of it, because at the end of the day, the goal is to try to harvest an animal. And if your equipment isn't working at the moment of truth, it's a huge letdown. So I've made those mistakes. Everybody's made those mistakes, but a couple of small things can help mitigate against those. Okay, so this is a catch-all for a lot of small items that I would call accessories. They usually go in somewhere where I'm trying to access it very quickly in the lid of my pack. So they might be smaller things that can be organized, things like toilet paper, things like an extra hat. I want to keep those pretty handy right in the lid of my pack. Rechargeable headlamp, probably want 2 of those. I usually have another one in this little case that's going to have things like my tags and first aid items like a quick clot bandage. I carry a couple of those kinesiology bandages that you can put on blisters, fire starter, a little bit of tape, super glue. Super glue is super handy for fixing little cuts on your thumbs, or if you stab yourself with a knife or fall and scrape yourself. Lighter, and I think that's it, a little extra batteries. I'm always going to have a replaceable blade knife, so I can just swap out a brand new blade. I don't have to sit there and sharpen a new knife. I can just throw a new blade on, so that's super handy. I like things like sunscreen and lip chap, just little things that help the creature comforts when you're out there in the wind and sun. Super critical item. This InReach is a product that I've used since the very beginning. Now they've gotten smaller and smaller and better and better. Two-way satellite texting device, very, very, very worth it for your peace of mind, your safety, but also can help you communicate with your hunting partner who's coming in to help you or pick you up, or the outfitter that might be trying to arrange a plane ride or something like that. It's a lot easier than a satellite phone. Pretty much everyone's carrying one of these in the northern sheep hunting spots, or your pilot will definitely be carrying one, so handy to have. Phone scope for your phone to go into a spotting scope. Also kind of handy, cool to take pictures of animals, but you can actually judge them and zoom in on photos. If you only get a picture of a sheep for 1 second as it goes over the mountain, you can look at the photos at night and see if it's old enough or long enough. I bring a camera. People always ask me what camera to bring on a mountain hunt. I tell them whatever one they're going to use. You could use your phone, you could use a GoPro, you could use a little Sony camera, a little mirrorless camera, but whichever one you're actually going to use and you know how to use is the one that you should bring. If you don't know how to use a DSLR or you're not going to use it, it's going to sit in your pack. Just leave it at home. Phones these days take awesome photos. And the other thing that I would add is having a camera accessible. So if your camera is in the bottom of your pack, it's not doing you much good. I mount this right on my pack of my shoulder strap on my backpack, and it's right there. I can take pictures, I can put it away. I also have a little rain cover for it, and it goes on top, so I can keep it out of the rain and elements. Don't do that all the time, but sometimes I put it on there. And just a little butt pad that you can cut from just a foam sleeping pad. This is just cut down. These are super handy. They don't weigh anything. They can be used to sit on or to sleep on if you have to. You can fan the fire that you're trying to make with it. I've used this stuff just for all kinds of things, and always, always, always at the bottom of my pack. Other things to consider: a little inflatable solar panel light that you can hang in your tent. If you're going to be out there in periods of shorter light days, you might want a light. If not, your headlamp might do, but something to think about. Dry bags, you can bring a lot of them. You can bring one of them. You can bring one big one for your food that doubles as a bag for meat. Super handy. And then your water carrying device, a little collapsible one, is not a bad way to go. It goes down into nothing when you're not using it. And then a bigger one if you are hunting in an area where you might not have water on top of the mountain and you want to just bring a whole bunch of water up from the bottom, live on top. That's kind of how I like to hunt sheep, is running the ridges and traveling and not having to go back and down. I think you can see more from the top. You can sort of ambush something if it's below you and the wind is blowing up. When you're in the bottom, you're always just seeming to only be glassing up to a certain portion of the country and not actually looking down and covering everything. It's also beautiful up there, and I think you see a little bit more. So a big water carrying device is actually really nice, and it can help you hunt a little bit more efficiently. And I think that's pretty much it. Extra pair of thin gloves, just things that I might want in the lid. Super handy. These are all smaller items and things that you can think about bringing. You don't need all of these. I don't bring all of these for every hunt, but it's just a rundown of some of the things that'll make it a little bit more comfortable, and depending on the situation, can make the hunting a little bit more effective. Okay, so last but not least, I get asked quite a bit about late season sheep hunting and the gear that I might bring and how to approach it. Really, foundationally, not a whole lot changes. These are the basic principles of selecting gear that works in the mountains. And there's a few substitutions. You're gonna bump up your insulation layer to something that just has more insulation. You're gonna bump up your boots to something that has a little bit more insulation or just better late season properties, like maybe a synthetic boot. You're gonna bump up your sleeping bag. And so those are the three main areas, but the same theories apply. You don't need to bring way more clothes. You just kind of have to think through this stuff. And if it performs for you in the early season, it's gonna perform in the late season. You just have to add a little bit more insulation, like down pants, super critical part of late season hunting. They keep you warm, but also they force you to sit down in glass and sit there and suffer through the snow. So when you do load up on all your insulation, you can sit there and think about hunting rather than you just want to keep moving. You just want to keep moving to stay warm. You're not actually trying to glass and think about what animals are doing. The thing about late season hunting too is the animals are going to be moving around not only in the morning and the evening, they're going to be moving around all day. They might be approaching the rut. They might just be moving around because it's cold and they're feeding to stay warm. It's like a great time to actually hunt, but you have to be prepared for it. I think a couple other things are, you always seem to forget to drink enough water in the late season. I know I do. You sort of just go out, you don't feel thirsty, but you're actually burning more water as your body's working harder to stay warm. So you just want to drink a ton of fluids, tea, soup, coffee, all those things to just sort of keep your body working the way that it should be. Of course, the days are going to be shorter in the late season, so bring a deck of cards or something to sip on in the evenings. That's always in our pack when we're doing late season hunting. And most of all, just know what you're doing. Be a little bit safer when you're out there. There is possibilities of avalanches. There is possibilities of sliding down icy chutes. So things like ice axes and crampons and knowledge, hunting with a partner, all those things are going to help out in the late season for you to be safe and also hopefully successful. Thanks for checking out this seminar. I wish that we were doing it in person, and next year we'll do it even better. Thanks for being supportive of the Sheep Foundation. And the last thing I'll say about the evolution that is managing your gear in the mountains, think about it in a way that is personalizing other items from other people's lists, ask questions, take concepts that I've given you, but take concepts that ultralight backpack hunters give you, that thru hikers give you, that maybe canoe and paddling packraft people are using out there. People that live and play outside for not only the purpose of hunting, think about gear in different ways than you might think about it. So get outside of the box of what hunters do and what you do and try different things. It's an evolution, and it's been that way for me, and I hope that it's that way for you, and that this stuff contributes to you having a more comfortable hunt, a safer hunt, a funner hunt, a more successful hunt. And stick around. Right after this, we're doing a live Q&A, and we're gonna give something away that I talked about. So you could win that if you stick around in the Q&A. And thank you once again for tuning in. We'll see you in the Q&A.